Okay, thank you. Thank you for having me here today. I appreciate it. My name is Lance Weiler, and I'm going to be talking about where machine intelligence and human creativity collide, telling stories in AI. I am a storyteller myself. I've been working in film, television, and games for over 20 years. And my presentation today is going to be related to some of the work that we do at the Digital Storytelling Lab. I'm the founding director of the Digital Storytelling Lab, and at the lab, what we do is we explore new forms and functions of storytelling. When I say forms, I mean things like artificial intelligence, the Internet of Things, augmented reality, virtual reality, as well as any other emerging technology. And functions are story for learning, storytelling for healing, for mobilization, for policy change, and for entertainment. So today I want to kind of focus on this notion of artificial intelligence and kind of augmenting creativity with it. I love this quote by Arthur C. Clarke: "Any sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic." I think for most people, artificial intelligence is something that they don't even realize that they intersect with on a daily basis. And some of the work that we do at the lab is really kind of anchored around this notion of discursive design. We co-create and imagine futures using storytelling as a way to bring people together to design possible futures. And so I want to give two examples today. The first is a project which is called Frankenstein AI. Frankenstein AI is a design research project we've been doing at the lab, where the narrative conceit of the project is based on this notion that Frankenstein's monster is wandering the internet in search of what it means to be human, and is encountering a lot of polarization and toxicity and extreme hate and extreme love, and is confused, and so decides to assemble humans in the real world, and does so by creating, we did this through a series of installations. We built our own AI for this, and we trained it on Mary Shelley's corpus on the novel, because the project is inspired by the novel, which has a couple core themes. It deals with the other, it deals with this idea of isolation and connection, but most importantly, it deals with this idea of us, of something being created and getting out of your control, which felt like it was a really wonderful metaphor for artificial intelligence. And so this was a project that we decided that we would take, we took it to the Sundance Film Festival, we traveled the world with it, and the construction of it really kind of flipped the script on what it means to use artificial intelligence. Most people know it as a personal assistant. We thought it would be very interesting to kind of change that up and have the AI asking humans questions. So we created a corpus, like a question corpus, and from that, basically what happened was the AI was trained on a variety of different inputs. We built the chatbot, which was the Shelley Prose, and the book was one of those data sets that we used. But then we also ended up using a variety of internet-based things. We took things from Reddit and a whole bunch of other places. And what would transpire is groups of people would come to an installation, and they would sit down across from a stranger, and they would start to do a series of interviews with each other, just asking each other questions. One would share a story of isolation, and the other would share a story of connection. And as they would go through it, at a certain point, the table in front of them came to life. And when that table came to life, they were instructed to kind of make use of a planchette that allowed them to kind of maneuver together and map some of the emotions that they were feeling during the conversation. That data was then collected, and we used it in a way to, in the next room that they went into, what you see there is, this was like a large tank. It was about 6 foot across, and it brought the AI to life. And we did that by using rear screen projection and smoke, but we pulled elements from the internet in real time, and the drums that you see there are Internet of Things enabled, and so they would start to talk, and they embodied the AI's voice, and then the AI would be visualized through that tank that you see there, at times being amorphous and at other times becoming human. The soundtrack was all pulled from the internet in real time. The images were pulled from the internet and manipulated. And so what would happen would be the participants would wander into this room, and the AI would greet them all by name and then would start to ask them questions. And then the group would work to answer those questions. The first question that the AI ever asked was a really very bizarre question. It was, why do humans like having sex even though they can see in color? And it was interesting because it started, the participants started to try to figure out, because there was ambiguity within the question, they started to debate what they thought it meant, and then it became this really interesting philosophical discussion, at which point they would give a response to the AI and commit a response together. So they were basically educating the AI as they went. After a series of those questions and prompts were given, eventually what we ended up doing was we did a performance where we took all the data from the various shows that we ran, and we had an AI work with a dancer through an earpiece, and the AI instructed the dancer through some machine learning choreography that we had done. And so the audience was able to participate, answering questions of the AI, and then the dancer moved based upon those interpretations. Now, what is interesting about this particular project was, in a lot of respects, it was something that was very surprising. You know, working with AI in a creative way, it often felt like we were kind of working with a toddler. It would fail in ways that we didn't expect and succeed in ways that totally surprised us, and it was very temperamental at times. And so the creative process of working with artificial intelligence is very iterative. There's a lot of kind of, pruning the data, baking it basically, and then seeing what the outputs are, and then continuing to refine it. It was interesting because this project, we did, pre-survey and exit surveys with a number of the participants who went through it, and it changed some of their minds, or started to affect some of their perceptions of artificial intelligence, which was really interesting. And we went on to be commissioned by the National Theatre in London in ITFA Doc Lab, and we took the project and we turned it into a series of dinner parties where Frankenstein AI was the host of these dinner parties, and everybody would sit at a table and they would wear a little earpiece, and the AI would ask questions to the whole group or to individual people, and it might say something to somebody like, lean to the person next to you and whisper this, or ask this question to the whole table, or rephrase this in your own words. And so it led to these really interesting debates and discussions about the underlying impact of AI politically, ethically, and so forth and so on. And it was a series of dinner parties, and they were held all over the world. The second project that I want to talk about is a bit different in the sense that it uses AI as a creative expression, but this project is really kind of rooted in apathenia, this idea that we look for patterns within things and find meaning. And we had spent some time studying QAnon, and then this project became even more precedent with the insurrection at the Capitol. But we had been working on this for like a year up until that point. Project Immerse is an immersive experience that brings together a group of people, and the basic narrative conceit of it is that they have received a data dump, and they're not sure who gave it to them, what it's trying to tell them, and they work together to uncover what they think the meaning is to all these artifacts and the data that they're interacting with. The whole key to it is 90% of what they're interacting with has actually been made by an AI. It's actually been made by a machine. So in Project Immerse, it's kind of this idea about how conspiracies are shaped. And the group kind of works through web pervasive technology. This experience uses Zoom and Miro, which is a whiteboarding technology or platform. And basically, a group of upwards of 100 people move through this experience, navigating kind of a whiteboard that has all the like collage and artifacts in it. And it has deep fakes and shallow fakes and text documents and audio and stills. And basically what transpires is they work together to uncover the meaning, or what they perceive the meaning to be. So these are examples of some of the deep fakes. They encounter a variety of different story elements that are all, as I mentioned, created by 90% of it is created by AI. So in this particular image here, the individual on the left and the right is the protagonist in the story, which is, he is quite literally a deep fake. This is one of the, this is a deep fake in an artistic way of the AI itself. I'm going to play this, but I'm going to play it without sound. And you'll see, hopefully maybe this will come through on your side too. It's kind of experimental in the way that it operates, but you...
In a flash, he realized he could not scream. He fell to the ground. His mask closed, revealing a dent in his throat.
So that's like an example of one of the characters within the actual story that the participants encounter. That is the character's name, Nightfall. But that's all the audio, the visual elements, all of it is made with artificial intelligence. So Project Immerse was, as I mentioned, was co-created with an AI that we had trained on declassified redacted documents, data dumps from Blue Leaks and WikiLeaks, political speeches, court documents, fake news stories, and 70s paranoid thrillers. So that was what we trained everything on, and it almost at times it was really wild. It became like kind of almost like a William S. Burroughs cut-up exercise where we would kind of look at what we would kind of feed in what we thought was interesting, and then kind of look at what the AI gave us, and then we would feed it again. And it was, similar to Frankenstein AI, was a very iterative process in terms of the operation of what we were doing. This is examples of what some of the actual interface looked like when you were interacting with the, when you were in Miro, the whiteboarding technology. And all of these are layers. And what's interesting about Miro is that it's an infinite canvas. So you can come at it, and I say it's very similar in nature to kind of this notion of if you were at a music festival and say your friend was at the main stage and you were at a side stage and you were trying to find each other, and you would text each other and say, oh, I'm by the water tower, and you would use geographical locations to help you find each other. Miro, in this particular instance with this experience, relies upon participants being in breakout rooms together, but they're focused on the actual board. And as they move through it, they can move all these little images, they can push play on different videos, and they can all do it concurrently, meaning that everybody's having a different experience within the board, which creates a really interesting sense of meaning and a way in which they have to work together to kind of not only discover things within the board, but also shape a theory of what they believe has transpired. Another example of some of the collage elements that you have, and there would be all kinds of really interesting things that when you were moving through this, occasionally you would start to interact with bots. So there were bots in the experience that would start interacting with you, and you got to a point where it was very difficult to know who was human and who wasn't. And at different times, you'd be thrown into a breakout room with the AI, and then the AI would interact with you. This is just some imagery of the the AI. I'm sorry, of some deep fake content that was in it, all kind of built by the AI and with a certain type of aesthetic, that matched the piece itself. So you have all these fragments, and these people are kind of working together to try to understand what the fragments mean, what the data means, and they start to build these narratives together. And they start to craft these theories of what they believe happened. And in doing so, they basically move through, in a certain period of time, they move through the whole experience. The experience lasts about an hour, and then we leave about 30 minutes for a debrief and a discussion about artificial intelligence and deep fakes and how they're made and so forth and so on. So it's very much an awareness type of a project. This window here is an example of how we did stuff with audio, in terms of, playing with deep fake audio. This is like the main character's mother.
Please leave a message after the tone. It's Mom. I'm sorry, you make me so angry. I had hoped that you might help us understand. I remember my father not even knowing how to get angry or to cry or to express to myself about how he felt. I hope to learn more about what it means for you to have control over how you are perceived and to show you how much I love you. But now I am afraid that you don't want to. We just want to understand. There is a chance that we can come back together. We love you and we want to learn how to work through this. Call me back.
So that's an example of like some deepfake audio that was in there that was based upon deepfake text. So everything was scripted by the AI. So the projects, both of the projects that I mentioned to you are very much, they're kind of almost like artifacts from the future in a certain respect, and as I mentioned, we use discursive design as a way to, discursive design is the idea is that you create artifacts and you embrace this notion of yes and. For anybody that's ever been involved in the arts, they might know that improv makes use of yes and. The moment that you say no or but, a scene dies. So what is interesting about working with emergent technology is it really requires a different type of mindset. You have to be willing to embrace ambiguity, and this is something that I teach at the core of what I do with my students. What's on screen here are a series of design principles. These are principles that we use to build these types of experiences. The first is this notion of thematic frame. In both cases, both those projects had a theme that was related to, in the one case, Frankenstein, and in the most recent case that I just showed you with Project Immerse, it's a conspiracy thriller. So there's a thematic frame that anchors it. That thematic frame creates kind of a common grammar and allows people to create freely with each other, and it allows for the collaboration to happen in a more, not only faster, but in a more authentic way. The notion of the trace is this idea from running these experiences. Sometimes we'll have like 2,600 collaborators who are involved in some of the work that we do. Both these projects have collaborators all over the world. The trace is this notion of, we found that in running these experiences that people really respond when they can see some part of themselves within the experience as a whole, and they can see a little trace of themselves within it. The idea of granting agency is really interesting because we're in this moment where it's an agency for one versus many. We're in a paradigm where storytelling is radically changed from one to many versus many to many. And so what does that mean in terms of allowing people to feel free to be able to tell stories, to share stories, and to have a voice? And so this notion of granting agency is this balance of, when is somebody able to be an individual in something versus paired with somebody or in a team, and moving back and forth between those things. And then the last is really an interesting concept. It's called Serendipity Management. Most digital experiences are over-designed. They are so afraid that somebody's going to break them that they don't leave any space for just people to bump into each other and unexpected things to happen. And so the idea of serendipity management is how can you design blank space that allows those who are stepping into these worlds to be able to activate their imaginations and to be able to kind of connect with each other in dynamic ways that maybe you didn't necessarily even intend. So I want to thank you for letting me share this, which was kind of almost like a bit outside the box in terms of the future of what storytelling could look like. But one thing is certain, storytelling is moving into a very experiential space, and we build immersive learning experiences. We believe that the more that people can be part of a collective narrative and can help to shape that narrative, the better the world can be. So these are some details for me, and you can get me at my Columbia email address, or if you're interested in the Digital Storytelling Lab, you can go to digitalstorytellinglab.com. That's digitalstorytellinglab.com. Thank you very much.